There's an organization called Northern Reinsurance Trusts in the north. It says it's doing conservation. Just the audacity of it. I mean, we used to live with animals before the white man came here.
Wildlife conservancies, they're basically a stocking horse. It's a cover.
It's about what is underneath, hedging it for the future. That is what all these conservancies are about. It's about hedging resources for the future. Whenever you have a national park in Kenya, there are natural resources in that. Savo Trusts, run by a guy called Ian Sanders. It manages the Savo National Park, says it's protecting elephants. It has nothing to do with elephants. You find Ian Craig in the north, has nothing to do with conserving or helping Africans access markets. And who is funding some of these organizations? They're very extremely well funded. And they have a militia that is better armed than the Kenya Police and the Kenya Armed Forces, led by a guy called, I'm sure you've heard about him, who was the founder of Blackwater.
Eric Prince.
Eric Prince. It's in the north.
We talked about him on the first episode of the show when he talked about recolonizing Africa.
So when you tell you, not recolonizing, they never left. They are here. It's just that we don't see it.
We are much more docile because these were settler colonies.
So when you look at the colonial ordinance of 1935-1936, the establishment of that tribal police is to brutalize the natives into submission. Is the one that instilled the fear that we still have to date.
Former settler colony.
It's not a former settler colony because they never left. They were in Karen initially. Then Africans started moving into Karen. They moved to Naivasha. Africans started moving there. They moved to Gilgil and Nanyuki. You know, in Gilgil, there's a place where you find a whole community of white people on 10 acres each. Ruto and his team are still trying to take us back to... It's like there was something that was interrupted in 2002 when Moi was removed from power. Even bringing the charlatan preachers like Bonke, he's called who?
Yeah, Benny Hinn.
This guy, Benny Hinn. You know, it's like these guys are stuck in a time capsule.
Restorative or reparative development.
My only problem with governments leading this call for reparation, advocated for by the same comprada elite that you talk about. For Eurobond, I believe it's another way of extracting.
They said they were going to invest it in development projects in the regions where the Nama and Herero lived.
Reparations are necessary if they are structured.
If you look at slavery, you had participating African kingdoms. You also had the collaborators, which of course landed you in hot soup some time back.
The fact that our economies are not as developed as the Western economies means that we have an opportunity to build with these technologies in mind. All politics is local. I believe that. In Africans Rising, we introduce ourselves. I say, I'm Mutemi wa Kiama. I'm an African from the Kenyan province. Because you are removing the mental borders.
What does that do to the model of the extractive capitalist system?
But the way the global economy is structured is that you need people to earn to consume.
Lenin saying imperialism was the highest stage of capitalism. So some people might argue maybe with AI, like
actually,
capitalism has invented something that will kill.
To destroy itself.
And there's a very interesting thesis by the former Greek finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, a new form of capital called cloud capital.
Let's have 1,000 Sankaras. If you touch one, superstar, a global superstar, because he can sing in Swahili and do collabos with other Africans, and that is okay. You know, and these are just in the 90s when I was doing, I was in high school, late 80s and 90s, you could not get a Kenyan song in Swahili or Sheng. Then came Five Alive, Eric Wanena and Bob Kioka and others. And today, you can play Kenyan music for a whole week in a club without repeating anything.
Yeah.
That's in a space of just 20 years.
20 years.
The young people right now who are in their 20s and whatever, they don't know a time when they were being born, there was no Kenyan music that you could call Kenyan music. Yeah. There was the old,
the old
Zilizopendwa. But
that was the extent of it.
That was the extent of it. Now you have, you have Benga, you have Tarab, the Kapuka, you have Gengeton, you have all this.
We even have local variations of reggae and raga.
The repertoire is unimaginable in just 20 years. And that's also a legacy of the Kibaki era. The fact that, he eased controls on what could be aired on radio, TV, and all that. It was quite liberal.
Yeah.
And so that this led to then people being more daring and,
more innovative, more
innovative
creative.
and more creative.
Like it unleashed the creative powers within the society.
And so it's possible to, people ask me, is it possible to mainstream, to create a new society in a short time? And I give the example of, so we used to talk about colonization. Remember Mishuki and the Matatu Menace?
Yeah.
Within 3 weeks, he was able to get the Matatu madness out of our transport system.
He streamlined the industry.
By just being strict, explaining to Kenyans what is happening, and Kenyans willingly walked to work. I remember I used to live in Getaru, and I used to work in Westlands. And I walked this road
Oh,
in the
interesting.
morning, and not alone. We used to walk on the highway.
Like huge
because
crowds.
the Matatus have gone on strike. And we would walk to work, and then in the evening we'd walk back. And those are quite a number of kilometers.
Yeah, from Gitaru all the way to Westlands. Yeah.
Then our boss, because he's the only one who had a car, he would try and pick as many as he can. Try to pick the people from Gong, Thika Road, whatever. Eventually, maybe he would find us somewhere here. People were coming from up this way.
Yeah.
And he pick us and drop us in Westlands.
Yeah.
And that was embraced by Kenyans and owned by Kenyans. And we had 13-seater Matatus that had belts.
Yeah.
Within a month or two. So it's possible if we have leadership
Yeah.
that is focused,
And a strong will.
and has a philosophy. The question you had asked earlier about what is the problem with why South Korea and others have succeeded is because they've had focused leaders who have the national interest. They've also had problems. I think some of the biggest corruption scandals on the planet, actually in South Korea, where almost every other president is in prison right now.
Yeah.
And
especially with the big conglomerates.
and
the chaebols.
So presidents and owners of capital are in prison. Why? But the fact that they're in prison shows that the society has systems that work.
Yeah.
So despite these people trying to serve,
There's a national code of ethic. The nation you are talking about that is lacking, let's say, in Kenya.
and I think that's an advantage we have. The fact that we can actually now imagine it, knowing what has not worked, not just in Kenya, but in East Asia, in Europe, in America, in China.
It allows us to imagine what
Can
work now.
what can work instead of reinventing the wheel. What are the safeguards we need to put in place? And I think that's what the Constitution 2010 was doing. But then it was given to the same guys to implement. And they've dismantled it in the last 10 years. Systematically
dismantling it.
Because they knew if this thing works, then the centralized system, which is it's about extractivism again. It's a client system where whoever controls the state then controls the tenders and then can extract money. And which is what basically was devolved. But if you had systems, if you had a CIC, Constitutional Implementation Commission that worked, if you had all these independent institutions that were created, National Commission on Human Rights, Division of Revenue and all these things, if all those institutions had been led to work, where would we be as a country? Maybe a nation would have emerged with a different ethic. And I think Kenyans can do it. Only that we need a strong leadership. Part of the reason why Ruto is in power is people believed his rhetoric. And it means his campaign and communication were able to they were able to use research to tap into what Kenyans want and then speak the right language. They're not delivering, but when you talked about a bottom-up economic model, that is what Kenyans want.
It was like in the psyche of most Kenyans.
And I think that's the decolonialization, because that means Kenyans, despite us still being stuck where we are, the arrested development, we can imagine a different kind of Kenya and Africa. And I think that imagination it's in our music, it's in our art, it's in our suppressed governance, participation, and I think all we did right now is a leadership that is willing to change this narrative and actually work towards building a nation rather than maintaining the colonial. I think Ruto and his team are still trying to take us back to. It's like there was something that was interrupted in 2002 when Moi was removed from power. So I think they are taking us back. I mean, even bringing the charlatan preachers like Bonke, what is he called?
Yeah, Benny Hinn.
This guy Benny Hinn. It's like these guys are stuck in a time capsule, a certain time,
In a trance of
and they are
sorts.
trying to now restart from there again, moving forward.
It's like a device is going to the factory settings.
Yeah, reset, going to
Yeah.
factory setting.
Which brings us nicely to the next question. You've said Kenyans, we can do it. There are people who argue that there's a distinct difference between the populations in post-colonial African states of former settler colonies as opposed to non-settler colonies. So the concept goes like people in Kenya, people in Zimbabwe, and maybe a little bit of South Africa, even though maybe South Africa might be an outlier case, and maybe also Zambia. We are much more docile because these were settler colonies. But if you look at, let's say, some Anglophone West African countries like Nigeria and Ghana as good examples, the population there, they are much more, let's say, aggressive, and you don't have a lot of cases of, let's say, internalized racism. And like the perfect example is you as a Kenyan, you go to a restaurant, you go to a hotel, a beach resort somewhere at the coast, and you have, let's say, an intern, let's say from Europe, from the West, and you could be having lots and lots of money compared to the intern. But the waiter, they'll go serve the other person first.
Especially when you have this kind of air.
When you have that type of
You're zoned out,
So some people argue, let's say, even if you call a protest in Nairobi, like most of Kenyans, even working class, middle class, they'll prefer to go to their nyama choma over that weekend in Kajiado, in Kitengela, in Ngong, as opposed to coming to, let's say, the protests. And maybe some people argue, of course, the police is always very heavy-handed on protesters. But even if you were to have, let's say, peaceful protest, and the police were to promise that they will not throw any tear gas or do anything, like it might be very difficult for you to get a huge number to come to this protest. What do you think about that aspect of people saying there's a distinct difference between former settler colonies and former non-settler colonies? Do you find that the dichotomy is actually logical?
I totally agree with that because I've actually witnessed it. I've been having lived here, but also traveled to some of the countries where they experience colonialism very differently. If you go to Nigeria, the interaction with the British was more of trade and that kind of thing.
And indirect rule.
And indirect rule. Delamere and Co. In Kenya, there's a movie called White Mischief that kind of captures the life then during the colonial period, the decadence and the life then. They came to settle. They did not come here to... Kenya was created by the Imperial British East African Company.
Yeah.
So it was, initially, it was for trade, to extract. But then...
They received even a charter from the Queen, right?
Yeah. When they realized how much wealth is here, some guys decided to come and settle here. And if you look at the adverts... in the 1900s, advertising for there's land, there's what, you can farm coffee, you can farm tea, you can farm whatever tea, and they came to settle. They came to create a mini Britain here.
Yeah.
So when you look at the colonial ordinance of 1935, 1936, that set up the Kenya police, or that time the tribal police, to help them govern. One of the lines that is there, and I've been looking for it because I'd seen a copy, but I can't find it online anymore. Said that one of the establishment of that tribal police is to brutalize the natives into submission.
Oh,
it states that very
like
clear.
Explicitly.
Yeah, because you see, you have a small group of white people who want to rule the country, or to
control the majority,
to control the country for their own extraction. And the model that was used here, so like us, we didn't have chiefs, and even if the chiefs were there, they were not the paramount or whatever kind of thing that came out later on. We had councils mostly. Most communities had councils. They were led by councils, all the way from the village to regional to whatever. That means power was not monolithic. It was not resting in one person.
Yeah.
And part of destroying that system was appointing a chief, to lord it over the community, and then giving this chief the tribal police. Because the community will not accept this person
Yeah.
who's been appointed.
He's been
so you have to
imposed.
use force, you have to brutalize the community. So that brutalization, which was vicious, it was rape, it was murder, it was dispossession of property, it was you are killed, you're battered,
Yeah.
is the one that instilled the fear that we still have to date. Because that wasn't passed on. Whereby if you want to go and protest, your parents will be like, why are you competing with the government?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't you know what happens? The whole thing in Kikuyu land of 1969, the brutalization, Wagala massacre for the Somalis, and many other incidents across, was all about maintaining control and brutally. So if you are oathing, then you're taking this thing that actually works on your psyche. That if you go and reveal our secrets, it's exploiting African spiritualism.
Yeah.
This and that is going to happen to you. And that generation is still alive, the one that oathed. So people keep talking about Central Kenya, why Central Kenya cannot rise up.
Yeah.
It's because your parents and your grandparents are holding you back. And they use words and they tell you, and you are socialized not to challenge the system because you're going to be brutalized.
Yeah.
Who are these people? Our grandparents were put in concentration camps. We don't call them that, but they were concentration camps.
Concentration camps, yeah.
The men were taken to Manyani and Mwea and others. The women were put in villages with moats and spikes. The men and the old men and the women and the kids. And they could not live. And there were people, barbed wire and guard houses and people with guns. And if you came out, you were shot.
And even Manda Bay, right?
Manda Bay.
In Lamu.
So all this is in our psyche. I remember one of the things we're exploring is the women would actually be allowed, they'd be allowed to go to their men in the other concentration camps because they were not in the same, to have sex and get pregnant and then come
back.
Give birth in
their own concentration
in their own whatever. And then so you have this thing of a generation of Kikuyus, especially in the 1950s, women who gave birth to kids and there were no fathers.
Is that where people started adopting the mothers' names? Or
No,
it's
no,
not
that is more of the clan system.
Okay.
The Kikuyu clan system. Because if you look at the Kikuyu, the creation story, you know about the daughters of Gikuyu and Mombi, but you don't know about the sons, the people who married them. So, like the Kikuyu clans are matrilineal, so the mother is more important in that in the society. What this did was it brought in a generation of women who had to survive without their husbands, kids who grew up initially in the early childhood without father figure, and men who were dislocated. By the time they came back, they were so broken that they were not able to reintegrate into their marriages and system. And then, of course, you are thrust into modernity. Now you have to survive. It's capitalism. You have to make money. And if you don't make money, you're not a man.
You're not a man.
So all this is what has contributed to this disconnect, whereby in this cetera, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Kenya,
and maybe Zambia also a little bit.
So you also have the class system, the British introducing a class system. Which school did you go to? Which clubs do you belong to? Which neighborhood do you live in? And to be able to access, because that is dangled on you, you have to go to Alliance, go to wherever, go to
St. Mary's,
work for certain companies and all that. And if you went to Alliance, which is a public school, and you went to St. Mary's, the person in St. Mary's has more access than. So these things might not be said, but they are there. They are socialized. You are socialized into them. And you create a very classist society, which is what Britain is still. If you go to Eton, then you meet sons and daughters of ministers and prime ministers and all that. We are trying to create, the British tried to create a miniature of that here, and it's still here.
Boris Johnson and David Cameron.
It's
all Eton, all
some
boys.
people owning 30,000 acres up to now. I mean, when Prince Harry or whoever married... it's Prince William married some white girl here who we had never heard of, but
Kate Middleton.
Kate Middleton, and they have a lake in their farm. I mean, what kind of in Kenya? I mean, what kind of life is that? Or the guy who flies his kids to school in Nairobi. Remember the helicopter that had landed somewhere in Nyeri. So that class system is the one that tells us there are some who are more, equal than others. Living in Karen, living in Gilgil, there's a white enclave there, or Naivasha, or wherever. There are these pockets, and then there are a few Africans who go in there, and they maintain this structure. In Nigeria, and white people, Nigerians don't even have space for white people. Is it the way in Kenya we worship them? We serve them first, or kids hang around their pants or whatever. Our girls want to go out with them. In Nigeria, they have no time for white skin. Nigeria people, and Nigerians are extremely wealthy. The people who you will meet in our normal circles. You know, when you see them chopping money in clubs, that's actually the life. And they're doing that with dollars, not Kenya shillings. An average Nigeria tells you I've made, $14 million in a year. They believe in themselves and the trade. And then that's a legacy of the interaction with the colonialists as a way of trade and exploitation.
Yeah.
There was no subjugation. It was, we're interacting. You have something I want, trade with me. And then you get your money and I get my money. So that's part of the challenge you have as a settler, where the white people came to settle. It's not a former settler colony because they never left. They were in Karen initially. Then Africans started moving into Karen. They moved to Naivasha. Africans started moving there. They moved to Gilgil and Nanyuki. In Gilgil, there's a place where you find a whole community of white people on 10 acres each. And you'll never see it from the road. All you see if you're past Pembroke, you see a container, police container, and then a rough road going in. If you just go in that 5 meters up that rough road, you will see an electric fence. Then you will see a live fence. Yeah? And you go in and you find this whole community, including an airstrip in there.
Oh.
Yes.
It appears I don't know my own country.
I discovered it by chance because I had a friend who liked my activism and she invited me to go to her uncle's place. And you're like, I can't believe I'm in Kenya.
You can't believe you're in Kenya.
You can't believe, and those
including
guys have
with
their
an
own
airstrip.
lifestyle.
Wow.
The uncle was talking about, I don't know where he had landed in Naivasha, and then Uhuru had also landed there in his private plane, and they said hi. And that's...
I heard from one taxi driver that we sometimes use. He was telling me a story about somewhere, I think it could be the place you're talking about. There's also like a lot of partying lifestyle, and sometimes they're always hired to take young Kenyan girls over there for, of course, whatever business we know. And he was describing it and he was like, that place is completely out of this world. I'm now joining like the dots.
And those guys call shots because they are partners with our elite. There's an organization called Northern Insurance Trust in the north. It says it's doing conservation of the north. And it's creating conservancies. It's working with communities and conservancies to prevent human wildlife conflict. First of all, just the audacity of it. I mean, we used to live with animals before the white man came here. In fact, the white man is the one who has come and killed all the animals. We were living in harmony with our wildlife way before the white person came here. So for the white person to purport to come and create conservancies to help us conserve animals, but you know what it is? Is that in that area from Turkana all the way to Tana River, it's been mapped. It was mapped in the 50s, 1950s. And that's where a lot of minerals are: iron ore, manganese, diamonds, gold, whatever. But they're just hedging it, sitting until, wherever you have a national park in Kenya, there are natural resources.
Resources down there.
And most of these national parks are run by the British.
Most of them were established during the colonial period.
Yeah, established in the colonial era.
Somebody did exploration at the time and knew.
And they said, okay, we are leaving, but like now you go, you find an organization called Savo Trusts, run by a guy called Ian Sanders. It manages the Savo National Park, says it's protecting elephants. It has nothing to do with elephants. You find Ian Craig in the north, has nothing to do with conserving or helping Africans access markets. And who's funding some of these organizations? They're very extremely well funded. Like NRT is funded by Danida, is funded by USAID, DFID, all these new colonial organizations. And they have a militia that is better armed than the Kenya Police and the Kenya Armed Forces, led by a guy called, I'm sure you've heard about him, who was the founder of Blackwater.
Eric Prince.
Eric Prince is in the north.
We talked about him on the first episode of the show when he talked about recolonizing Africa.
So when you tell you, not recolonizing, they never left. They are here. It's just that we don't see it. They are here. They never left.
So in your estimation, wildlife conservancies, they're basically a stalking horse. It's a cover.
It's about what is underneath. We do need to conserve. We don't need. Actually, what we need is for our life to be left to thrive. Yeah, after they came and killed here for sport hunting and all that, safari, whatever.
Yeah.
They decimated
Trophy hunting.
We need right now those conservancies, what they're doing by blocking the free movement of animals. Our pastoralists are not able to graze the animals because their well-being depends on being able to move from where there's grass to where. I mean, once they finish the grass, they need to move. These guys have blocked all those corridors. They fenced off all those corridors, and there's a lot of conflict you're hearing in the north between the Pokot and the Samburu and all that. It's about that. It's about militia. It's about being able to, because this guy wants to displace the population. Because they know what is underneath. Have you heard anything about the water that was in Turkana? The one that could last 70 years. Have you heard about it anymore?
No.
Did the water evaporate or what happened to it?
It was channeled out?
No, it's still there.
It's
still
not
in the interest to have it extracted now. Because the next wars are not going to be over oil. They're going to be over water. In the next 30, 40 years. So someone is sitting on that water, hedging it for the future.
Yeah.
That is what all these conservancies are about. It's about hedging resources for the future. It's still continuing the colonialism.
Talking about Nigeria, of course, the way you mentioned when you've been there, a friend of mine mentioned something. I've not been to Nigeria myself, that even if you go to the airports, like they have a special lane for Nigerians. If you have a passport, you are our own person, like you get like priority entrance back into the country or when you're leaving. While I mean in so many other countries, even in Africa, you'll find it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Like you with your Kenyan passport, you're not going to receive any priority. Like this is a lane for Kenyans. Yeah.
In fact, in Kenya, it's the white people who will get priority because they can be extorted. You were out at work too, so
there's nothing you give the people, so why should they have you? Another topic of discussion, the issue about reparation debates on the African continent. Like a couple of African leaders have been leading those calls, like the Ghanaian president, Nana Akufo-Addo. And in Namibia, of course, there's the issue of reparations from the Germans. And if somebody ties that to, let's say, there's a concept some people are arguing, it's called restorative or reparative development. So some development-oriented organizations, foreign aid, they say maybe some of the projects being done, like it's a way of reparations. But people are saying foreign aid, you cannot say it applies to the concept of reparations. Anyway, what's your take on the entire reparations debate that has been picking up steam on the African continent, let's say, since 2019, 2020?
There's even another aspect called climate reparation that is emerging right now. And I'll come to that. So my take is that the arrested development that we have on the continent is a direct result of what has been extracted and continues to be extracted from Africa. So my only problem with governments leading this call for reparation, based on past experience, and based on like what we talked earlier, whereby you don't have a philosophy. If you don't have a philosophy for reparations, for example, let me even step back to like our personal finances. Let's say I don't have plans for my life, a structured plan. This is what I want to achieve, and I need this much money. Let's say I want to go to school, do my master's, it will cost this much. I want to do my PhD in the UK, it will cost 5 million, so I need 5 million. When you have a plan, or I need to build a house, 2-bedroom, I need to buy a plot, whatever. Once you have a structure of what you want to do, then it's possible, like even if you want charity and you got 10 million, the likelihood of you wasting that money is very low.
Yeah.
But if you had no plan, if you get that 10 million, maybe within 6 months it will be gone, and then you'll wonder where the money went.
Yeah.
So I want to apply the same thing to reparations. So there are a lot of calls for reparations, but these reparations are being advocated for by the same comprador elite that you talk about, who just want the money to put in their pockets.
Yeah.
Because there's no national policy on reparations. We don't have any. I think the Caribbean countries have worked towards that kind of policy. But I don't know, even Ghana, whether they've developed a policy like this is the money we think has been robbed from our country. And if we got that money, this is where we'll invest it.
We'll invest it in.
We'll build this number of schools, we'll build hospitals, we'll build roads.
Infrastructure.
So that has not been done. So even if you are to be given, let's say you want $1 billion as reparations, or 2 billion like Namibia got, where is that money going? What will it do? You know, reparation means the restorative reparation.
Yeah.
What is it restoring? You know,
The Namibian case was actually quite interesting because German offered the 2 billion, but the Namibian government rejected it because it was offered. They said they were going to invest it in development projects in the regions where the Nama and Herero lived. And I mean that those were the two groups that you can say they suffered 80%. They bore the brunt of the genocide, the first genocide of the 20th century. So they said it was going to be invested in development projects. And I think for the Namibian government, they wanted that money, let's say like in cash, channeled to the government.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's what you're talking about.
That's
actually.
what I'm talking about. And once it goes to the government, who knows whether even the Herero will hear that the money came.
Yeah.
You know, and the reason why I think most Africans or most people heard about it was that contestation. Then that's how even the rest of us heard about and weighed in on the debate.
Yeah.
So climate reparations are about, for example, what is happening in Kenya, like the floods that we've seen in Mathare there in the last few months, and Mukuru and other parts of Kenya, or the floods we've seen in Mozambique, and whereby Africans are being hit by these things. Cyclones now are coming.
Climate shocks.
And not for anything that we've done. It's because of the pollution that is happening in the West, pollution that is happening in China, pollution that is happening elsewhere. Africa only contributes 4% to emissions, 4%, the global emissions. So we are nowhere. And we say, if you guys are contributing 96% to the emissions that are causing all these weather events that are affecting us and destroying our livelihoods and our homes, then you need to pay for them. Right now, the houses are being demolished in Mathare, Mukuru, and other places. Those people are not being taken to somewhere. How would climate reparations look like? That money would buy land and build houses for those people. So they go and live in dignified spaces. Because they are victims of climate change. There are islands that are flooding right now across the Atlantic Ocean, across the Indian Ocean and other places. There's snow that is melting in some areas in the north, in Europe and North America, that is affecting livelihoods of the indigenous communities groups, of those places. They need to be compensated. But then who sits down and works this out? And works it out in an honest give and take? And why would anybody anyway pay the reparations? Why would the people who continue extracting, if new colonialism still goes on, for example, Eurobond, I believe it's another way of extracting. If you look around the Eurobonds across Africa, there's no country that has actually been able to repay those Eurobonds. And now they're in IMF straitjackets. So and the extraction is continuing. Why would anybody who's enjoying benefit of now an entire government structuring its tax regime to extract so that it can pay odious debt? Why would anybody pay reparations? So there's that question. But I believe reparations are necessary if they are structured. If there's a debate about it, and you have responsible governments that want to actually make a difference for their people, which I don't see anywhere in Africa. Apart from maybe Namibia again and Botswana maybe, where there's a government that is geared towards developing its people. There are very few other governments. It's all about the elite.
And anyway, some opponents of reparations, let's say in the West, they also argue that if you look at slavery, you had participating African kingdoms who are also they participated in the slave trade, they themselves. And during the colonial period, you also had the collaborators, which of course landed you in hot soup some time back. So they are saying if you're talking about reparations for colonialism, how about the collaborators? Somebody can say, of course, they were influenced by the Western colonialists. But some of them could also argue you had people who were willing and actually participated in oppressing your own people. So it's kind of hypocritical to push for the reparations narrative when some of you guys, like if you receive a blanket reparations, let's say from the West, but someone will say, what if part of the reparations goes to the descendants of the collaborators or the descendants of the slave traders, let's say in the 16th and 17th century?
I would be very willing to engage in that conversation because we say, let's calculate how much it was, who benefited, how much did they benefit. If it's the collaborators, let's say the Moi family or the Kenyatta family, the Crow report says, these guys got maybe $7 billion. How much of that can we recover? Then once we say, okay, we talk to the Moi family, the descendants, and they say, okay, this is what we are willing to pay as reparations. Because I'm sure they would.
Yeah.
Reasonable. Like, we're not telling them we want all your wealth. They are product of that time, whereby the system, the extractive system, created a king, a big man, who was to help them continue extracting. So all the presidents who came in, who were egalitarian, were killed, and the ones who could serve the system were maintained in power. That's how Moi stayed in power for 24 years until the Cold War ended. So what are you willing to give back to society? Kenyatta, same. Your friends, same. Okay, now these guys have given. Okay, let's talk. Britain, how much are you willing to give? France, how much are you willing to give? Let's calculate how much your country has benefited from extracting from Africa for the last 100 years. How much is it? How much are you willing to give? Let's have that debate.
Okay.
The structures that were created to empower. But one of the traumas that we have as Africans is slavery that we have not dealt with. Because as you're saying, Africans hunted, caught other Africans, put shackles on them, and went and put them in caves at the coastal towns and sold them off. Whether it's Shimoni, whatever, or west coast of Africa, Gold Coast and all that. That is the reality. Let's have that conversation. Who are the beneficiaries of this thing? The last 500 years have been about cheap labor. So, with the slavery, then colonialism, then wage slavery now, the way the work is designed, even the education system to produce workers and the conveyor belt, as we call it. So now, the interesting thing, which I think modern philosophers have to grapple with, is that in the next few years, maybe 3 or 4, with advancement in AI and robotics, most of the traditional jobs are gone. In fact, they're already gone. It's just that we are still holding on to some of them. I think an office that had 20 people doing clerical jobs, research, whether it's desktop research, that kind of thing, a newspaper that had writers, produce content, photographers, designers, all those jobs are gone. Because I can produce a graphic in seconds that would have taken a very experienced Photoshop graphic designer, maybe 10 days. And even then, what they would have produced is not what even the rudimentary AI that you have right now, the Mid-Journeys and even ChatGPT right now is also producing images. Some have issues, but you can give a prompt, one sentence, and it will give you a concept that would take a graphic designer forever to create. Writing proposals, writing even books. There's AI now that can write a book. You give it instructions, you say, chapter 1, talk about this, chapter 2, talk about this, from this angle and that kind of thing. And with a click of a button, within less than 10 seconds, you have your book.
There's an interesting case, it was on the BBC, I think, a week or 2 weeks ago, about a legislator in Peru who did an entire bill, draft legislation. From AI. Maybe you heard about it.
I heard about that story, And it was rejected, but why are you rejecting it? I mean, you look at the quality, just look at the merit of the bill and the legal arguments. I think even before AI became what it is, what now we are having, with generative and all that, 2-3 years ago, IBM Watson was able to respond to medical questions, to legal questions too. And even then it was said that now you don't need a lawyer because this thing can read 100 constitutions in a second. Or even let's use the doctors. So you become a respected doctor by publishing in certain journals.
Yeah.
And then the doctors who keep themselves up to date by what has been published are now, are the best consultants and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you have to keep reading constantly. Now here is a software, here is a technology that can read all medical journals that have ever been written in 1 second and give you a summary of like a synthesis of this is like the likely disease. You have toilets that when you go and pee in that toilet, it analyzes your pee and tells you could be possibly suffering from this and that and that.
Yeah.
That's now like there, it's here in China and wherever.
Yeah, I saw a clip about that one from China.
You just go pee, you normal pee, and then it tells you go and see a doctor. Likelihood you have high blood pressure, or you have diabetes, or you have this and that. Your high protein content is too high, go and see a doctor, etc. etc. That's where we are. And these things can analyze what a traditional doctor would take 7 years to be trained to be able to do this and still get it wrong. But this thing, when it tells you your count of this and that is this, it's sure bet that then you can take that to a doctor now based on this, then this could be the diagnosis and that kind of thing. We are in for a rough time as Africans. But I think we also have an advantage. The fact that our economies are not as developed as the Western economies or the Chinese economy or the Japanese economy means that we have an opportunity to build with these technologies in mind. I used to say when Uhuru was president that if I was him, if I had become president of Kenya then, I'd have invested in clean energy in this way. Because our economy is still relatively young, I'd have taken the technology. I think BMW had technology, hydrogen driven car as early as 30 years ago. Mercedes-Benz the same. Elon Musk has taken some of this technology, even the battery pack that he's used to for Tesla, he just improved it. He did not invent it. That technology already existed. All he did was make it more efficient and then get economies of scale. And of course, then that has totally upended the vehicle industry. Now, all those other people who are doing, petrol-driven cars are now rushing to catch up with the
combustion engines.
With the EV, the combustion engine. Had Kenya invested in the charging stations and all that, and then said, in the next 15 years we want to phase out the combustion engine cars, we would have developed the technology, we would have educated our engineers and technicians in that technology, and now as the rest of the world adopts, they'd have been the ones to be consulting. You get? Because they have the skill sets and we've tested.
It's almost like a leapfrog model.
Like
You're
we
jumping
did.
a stage where other people, they still don't know what is coming. You jump ahead and the benefits await you in front of almost everyone.
And I think we have that opportunity. But unfortunately, as I keep saying, because of our arrested development, we don't have leaders and policymakers who see that opportunity. And even if they see, because they can't make money out of it, they can't get kickbacks out of it, it will just be swept
under the
carpet.
Yeah.
You remember the doctors, when there was a doctors' strike, and we had 4,000 doctors unemployed. And they refused to employ our doctors, our Kenyan doctors, because nobody would get a cut if we employ doctors.
Yeah.
But they imported doctors from Cuba, because when you import them in bulk, you can get 10% of that deal.
Yeah.
That is the unfortunate thing about it. So AI has potential for us to leapfrog in the next 10, 20 years. But unfortunately, most probably it will destroy our economies. Because even our governments have no idea how to deal with it. And the jobs, even the few jobs that are there, especially the jobs where you train people to go to the office and do, are gone. And you have no structures to retrain people, to reorient Kenyans towards figuring out what to do once their jobs are gone. One last point. So I was talking about labor.
You're talking about the wage.
The wage.
500 years.
The 500 years of low wages. Now with robotics, people are not needed to work anymore.
So what does that do to the model of the extractive capitalist system?
So the irony is that these guys have created this thing, that is going to eliminate cheap labor, human labor. But the way the global economy is structured is that you need people to earn to consume.
Yeah.
So if your people are not earning, the people who are being replaced by the robots are not earning, who's going to consume your products?
Yeah.
So that's a dilemma, that the dichotomy that I don't know whether these
how
guys
they'll solve it out.
They solve it out, but maybe they're just working themselves out of existence, because
Yeah.
if Apple depends on selling iPhones at a certain price, and if the people who are supposed to buy those iPhones cannot afford the iPhones, where are you going to sell it to? And how are you going to keep Apple going? So that's a dilemma that is coming.
Collins Karanja, who I call the Kenyan Marxist, who I did episode 1 with, he said, in a way, he's not that afraid of capitalism because he thinks it will die a natural death. And of course, you can talk about Lenin saying imperialism was the highest stage of capitalism. So some people might argue maybe with AI, like finally, capitalism has invented something that will kill.
That will destroy itself. I think that's also a possibility, because
you cannot run with the same system forever.
And because the technology is there now, because technology exists whereby robotics and AI are actually taking jobs.
Yeah.
So they're not going to say, being capitalists, they're not going to say, no, okay, let's not implement this technology, let's employ individual people. They want to maximize on their profits. The nature of capitalism is that they are going to work there. So look at a Tesla plant right now. How many people work there? Most of the things are done by robots. Building a Tesla car or any of these electric EVs in China, wherever. So you can have work that used to be done by 1,000 people being done by 10 people. That is what is happening right now before AI. What is going to happen in the next few years? So capitalism might implode on itself.
And there's a very interesting thesis by the former Greek finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis.
I love the guy.
Yeah. He even wrote a book, I think it was published last year. He's looking at the case of Amazon, and he's calling it a new form of capital called cloud capital.
Cloud capital.
Yeah. Because like now you have Amazon renting out space to the big tech companies. Jeff Bezos has become like a tech feudal lord, something of the sort. So I mean, it's a really interesting topic, and it remains to be seen how it will play out, of course, in Africa, but even in the rest of the world.
If you look at what is happening politically across the world, fascism, the rise of the
far
Boris
right.
Johnsons and the Trumps and the Rutos, all these are far-right people. It's mostly because of lack of answers to these challenges that face humanity. So the populists are the ones who are people who are willing to lie and to tell the people, the voters, what they want to hear, although they are not going to deliver on it.
And to also sell simplistic fixes and solutions.
And then also be unaccountable enough to be able to lie and use propaganda to get there. Because you and I will not lie to the people. We will tell them the truth, and people don't want to hear the truth. So appealing to the heart rather than the head. So the Rutos, the Trumps, the Boris Johnsons, they appeal to the heart and the fears of the population so they can get into power. So you have Steve Bannon, of course, knowing how to manipulate conversations.
A real strategist.
A real strategist. So unfortunately, that is also not sustainable.
Yeah.
Because the same people who...
It will run its course.
Those people will come for you. If you don't deliver.
Okay.
And I think, as Ruto might discover in the next few months or years, the young people who he lied to maybe are the ones who will come for him.
Interesting. Mwalimu Mutemi wa Kiama, parting shot. I think it has been a really thought-provoking, captivating conversation. How will you summarize the outlook for Africa? You travel a lot in African countries. You just said you met Joshua Maponga last week. I know maybe there could be some stories about that you can tell about that. But anyway, what's your overall outlook for, let's say, Africa going forward? What will be your parting shot in terms of decolonizing our minds, decolonizing our literature and education systems?
We need to do more of what you're doing. So the education of now and the future is in podcasts, in videos on TikTok, in the conversations you are having. So you cannot bottle this gene anymore. Even if they're trying to increase tax on content creators and that kind of thing.
Kenya Film and Classification Board in the past week.
The hunger for this knowledge is a lot. And the young people don't really care about, a generation might complain,
Yeah.
but the young people are already there. So how do we shape conversations so that they are structured and meaningful to the young people and then inform the citizens of the future? So the work that I do, and the community organizing that I do, and working with other people, this is how I put it. We have the Sankaras and the Lumumbas and the Martin Luther Kings and Jesus Christ and all these, who are individuals who had ideas on how their societies could be better, our societies could be better. A lot of them were taken out by the status quo because they were upsetting the status quo.
Yeah.
What are the lessons there? Those lessons are what the people we are organizing with are working with. That let's have 1,000 Sankaras. If you touch one, if you kill one,
999 are still there.
those 999 will become 10,000 tomorrow or 100,000.
Yeah.
So it will become that relation. It becomes unproductive to attack this one. We've had a system, capitalism, that glorifies the individual, an individual, rugged individual.
Yeah.
But that is what has gotten us into the problems we are in. So let's build communities. All politics is local. I believe that. So here if we want to solve the problems in this neighborhood, we have to come together. We have as neighbors and see what is it that we can do together. And you can extrapolate that to our ward, to our constituency, to our country. In Africans Rising, we introduce ourselves. I say, I'm Mutemi wa Kiama. I'm an African from the Kenyan province. Because you are removing the mental borders that the people who sat in 1885 in Berlin and subdivided our continent.
Yeah.
Even though the physical borders are still there. But then you're also agitating towards removing those physical borders. So first, everything that humanity has ever done has started as an idea. So we can start pushing those ideas and speaking positive things and educating each other and creating forums where we can have conversations, podcasts like these, yours, to reach as many people and plan so that seed can move. And you mentioned Maponga. That's what Maponga has been doing with African spirituality. He's a trained theologian in Christianity. He has walked away from that. And as he has walked away from that, he has walked away with Africans. He has a huge following across the continent.
Yeah.
I think his Facebook page has like 500 and something, 20,000 followers. He has many other platforms. Now, podcasters are looking for him. I mean, we brought him to speak about a borderless Africa, and he spoke about 7 pillars of how Africa can be borderless, including education, industrialization, sports, spirituality. He spoke about 7 things. The key for him was, for the young people, they have to imagine an Africa different from what their fathers and mothers have inculcated in them. Because now they have technology. You talked about AI and internet and all that allows them to be borderless. You can be seated in your house and you're working for someone in the UK or in China or wherever.
Yeah.
So that is the future of Africa. And I think it's an exciting future. Now, if you can get governments that will actually invest in making that a reality. Kenya right now is situated where it is in terms of timelines. From Nairobi to the US is about 8 hours to the east coast of the US. Nairobi to Beijing is about 8 hours.
Yeah.
Nairobi to Frankfurt or wherever flight is 9 hours. Nairobi to Australia could be 15 hours. So we are right at the center of the planet.
Yeah.
And that is something we can leverage in terms of, we talked about Amazon, like can we create even a distribution center where all these producers come and keep their things here and we distribute them across the planet.
Yeah.
We have a very unique location right at the center of Africa and right at the center of the world if you look at the way
the globe looks
global infrastructure. Why don't we work towards making a Kenya that will actually create an enabling environment for Kenyans to be global citizens, for Africans to be global citizens. Yes, that's my parting shot.
Mwalimu Mutemi wa Kiama, it has been a really interesting conversation, captivating, thought-provoking. I've really loved the intellectual discussions and exchanges, and I definitely know you're going to do this some other time.
Thank you so much for inviting me and the opportunity.
And thank you so much for honoring the request and for coming and being our guest 003. Let's continue the journey.
Asante sana.
Okay, thank you.